I think, and I haven't really talked about this, but I've become, more open to it. Um, whenever I had my daughter, I'm a single father now, and in 2022, after we'd had my daughter, me and my now ex-wife started having some issues
Okay.
whenever it came to just conflicts, and it was a common thing in my life whenever, especially in relationships. I was always a fixer. Like I think men at a
Mhm.
core are fixers, but we get
Yeah.
so busy trying to fix the needs of others or take care of others that we never actually look inward and take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
It also is really easy to fall into the trap of trying to fix and solve other people's issues without actually resolving our own issues as a band-aid to basically not have to look inward. And during that process, whenever we went through that separation, I hit some really dark moments where, I had people around me that were like, well, you should just, like it's that person's fault or that person's fault. And they would be projecting into me basically this image of the fact that like, you don't have to take responsibility for it. It really bothered me because I look at society in general and we've become we've fallen into the trap of escapism and really avoiding, taking ownership over what we are responsible for in our lives. And I kind of at this point where I was like, dude, I really need to dive deep into what it is. Why is this also my fault? This can't just be one person's fault. I have to take
Mhm.
responsibility for my actions, which is what I choose to do. And as I
Yeah.
dug in, I started figuring out the fact that I was always so busy fixing other people and so busy trying to craft this image of I have it all together, so let me fix your problems, that I never actually started doing self development. And I'll share a story with you. In my early 20s, I never went to university. I never went to college. Don't have a degree. I went to a Christian high school growing up, where I fit in with a lot of the guys that smoke pot. It was easier for me to fit in with them because they didn't really care. You could
Mhm.
BS and say whatever you wanted, and they were still going to accept you because in at that part of my life, the usage of marijuana was just an escapism for me personally. So it was a good way for
Yeah.
me to escape. The same people I surrounded myself with, we weren't taking ownership. We were just taking easy street to just kind of coast through. And
Mm.
whenever I graduated, I didn't go to university. I went for one semester and I was helping my dad out with some of his work. And what ended up transpiring is I started selling drugs, started selling weed, started selling to other people. And whenever I
Okay.
went through that process, I did what, most people do, which is you end up making the wrong sale to the wrong person and ended up being an undercover cop. And
Mhm.
I ended up going to jail for about 10 days. My dad did one of the best decisions in that
Wow.
scenario. He left me in jail for 10 days and made me basically pay my way out and pay the consequences on the tail end. But during that process, I
Mhm.
actually ended up meeting a gentleman that was my court order therapist.
Okay.
I hated the guy. I absolutely couldn't stand him. And the reason I couldn't stand him was because he told me what I needed to hear, not what I wanted to hear. And at
Mm.
that point in my life, at a 20-year-old man that was just trying to figure out how to get past this as easy as possible and as painless as possible, I didn't want to hear it. And so I basically told him everything that he needed to hear so that I get my paper signed and didn't see him for years. Well, jump back to 2022. So I'm going through this really like deep dive into my soul, who I am. I read a book by a gentleman called Richard Rohr. It's called The Immortal Diamond, where he talks about the death of
Mm.
ego or the false ego and how
Wow.
exactly to dive
Mm.
into your limbic. If you look at it from a neurological perspective, dive into your limbic system, dive into your reptilian brain, your emotional center to figure out why are you responding to these things? Like what's going on whenever it comes to being trapped in a mental maze. And as I started digging into
Mhm.
that, that's where I started realizing and noticing these different neural pathways that were connected to falsehoods that I had basically instilled in my own life, and I was hiding things from myself. And
Yeah. Yeah.
back to my therapist that I had when I was 20, ironically enough, I went to a meeting to kind of figure out some things that I had gone through, and I literally turn and look, and that same therapist was there. And this would have been 14 years later. And at that point in
Wow.
my life, I was actually ready for change. I actually wanted to start embracing things. Crazy how God does that stuff. And I looked over
Wow.
at him and I walked up to him and I said, I need you because I know that you're not going to BS me. I know you're going to tell me what I need to hear, not what I want to hear.
Hmm.
And I went and I made an investment in him and started paying and going weekly. And I mean, dude, this is self-pay. So this is not, this is not insurance money. Like I am paying out of pocket a
Mm,
psychiatrist to basically talk to me. And dude, meeting with that guy and choosing the one that was going to tell me what I needed to hear, not what I wanted to hear, choosing what I needed to hear was one of the most best decisions and investments I've ever made in myself. Because going through that process, that's where he started telling me, look at young Adam, look at the lessons that he learned at a young age. Look at what is the, here's the result of your life. Let's look at what is behind the veil. Like what from a childhood perspective, like what from a neurological perspective, why are you making these decisions based off of your learned actions? Because me plus my past experiences equals what I do today. And so I think really, if you want to look at a pivotal moment in my life, it was going and finding people that would not tell me what I wanted to hear, but they would tell me what I needed to hear so that I could actually grow because those are the people that actually care about you.
it's so interesting what you were talking about when you first went through that therapy. They were kind of like forcing you to do it, right? You had no choice and you were just kind of resentful. You hated the guy and you just wanted to, I guess at that point, you just wanted to fix the symptoms, right, of the problem that was occurring. Like you have this deep seated problem, which has the symptoms of that have manifested in your life because you're distracting yourself, you're not applying yourself, you're not being the best person you can be, and you end up in jail. Like that's one of the worst case scenarios of not dealing with your internal shit. And then uh, as you realize that, oh, all these things that are happening, they are symptoms of this deep seated problem which is going on within me, and then you realize, oh, I don't need to focus on the symptoms of what's going on anymore. I need to focus on the actual problem, which are things that stem from childhood and all these things that, and then you're willing to actually into those things, like with the therapist again. It's such a coincidence, that it was the same therapist that you saw and you got treated by him. And it just shows the willingness as well that you had to transform and change. The fact that you put in money down. Um, People say like with these things, like, oh, money doesn't really matter that much. I think sometimes people say that it's like, oh, it's just money. But when you spend money on something, you become so much more committed to it. It's all offers you coaching or consulting for free. You're like, oh yeah, it's just you're not really that committed. But if you drop like, it's not cheap to have a proper psychiatrist or psychoanalyst or something like that. It adds up right over the weeks and months, and it shows you're really dedicated and you really apply what you're doing. Then, so good for you, man, for sure, for going through that all that stuff. But I think men being, like you said, fixers, we want to often fix the symptoms. Like there's something bad turning up in our lives. We want to fix that symptom, like the habit or the behavior. We want to try and recorrect that symptom. But really, we distract ourselves from the actual problem, which is all the shit that's in our backpack, right? Which is like the idea you talk about, that metaphor of unpacking the backpack. So do you want to go into that a bit more? Like, what is that? Like, what is the backpack that we carry with us? What do you usually find in there?
So it's funny you mention that. So the way that I came up with the backpack theory is during that process I mentioned earlier, I ran a service company for 8 years. So the gentleman, which I have no qualms with the guy, like he invested a lot of time and energy in me.